So I'd like to just say my name is Carilla Clements, and I'm an associate professional clinical counselor, which means that I'm about 3 months away from licensure, so I'm really excited about that. And I am super jazzed to talk about, of course, something that is, of course, very dear to my heart as well, and something that I think that is a conversation that not too many people are having. So I'm very fortunate to be here and be a part of that conversation. So I'd like to begin with just a short story. If you just indulge me with a little bit of technology here. Just going to pull this forward. And so glad that the weather is getting better, right? And warmer. All right, give me 1 second. So I'm going to read to you a story. And as you're listening to the story and we continue to talk, this is an open conversation, I would like to give my insight as a clinician, as a therapist. I've been working for the last five and a half years. And how a lot of the similarities are coming around, the same patterns of behavior are being heard. So I hope you enjoy the story. I thought of you today. I hope life finds you well. I thought of you and wondered how, after so many years, your impact in my life was still so visible, and I cried. I cried for lost innocence. I cried for expected joy and forlorn reality. I cried because you were the first woman I ever loved, yet so much of that love felt like pain. And I wanted to thank you for the pain that set my course into a new direction of life. If you hadn't given me that pain, I would not have wanted to become the person I am today. You also gave me joy. The joy one feels when youth is all you must give in life, and it simply overcomes pain. But now I'm older and wiser. Perhaps it would have given me less scars in my heart. I am better now, and for that, I cry. I cry. Thank you for what you gave me. Be well always, me. As if, like all movies, this love I had with her gave me the drama I was yearning to have. I met V on a warm summer evening at a barbecue at a person's house that I scarcely remember. She was 21 and I was 23. I don't know why she captivated me at the time, although many years later in therapy, I would understand fully, but she did. Her gentle smile, the sadness in her big brown eyes, and her broken spirit simply spellbounded me. I had never been with a woman, and I knew that I wanted to badly. I felt the pressures of a family that would never accept my lesbian identity, but somehow in her softness, I simply didn't care about my fear. We walked down to a nearby bar, and after the barbecue of my best friend, I tried everything I could to muster enough to flirt with her, even though I really didn't know how. But when she smiled back, I knew this was the beginning of the rest of my life. Call me a romantic or a fool, but there I was embarking on a new way of being for me, and I loved it. A couple of weeks passed, and I never heard from her. I was living with my parents, still working, and trying to make a frail attempt at college, but still very anxious about my sexuality. I grew up with a fabulously dramatic family, and I loved them so much. Hence the reason why I simply couldn't break their hearts in telling them that I was gay. But I found myself breaking my own heart, a trend I would repeat over and over again for decades, not realizing how adept I was in doing that. But she captivated me. A young girl born in Juarez, Mexico, and raised in LA, she had seen way too much life for being so young. Her father and her mother had a very abusive relationship with physical and mental violence that spilled over to her and to her siblings. She was in constant fear of being hit, and although she never let on, I knew I had to save that injured bird. And that was my greatest downfall. My greatest weakness was to save the brokenhearted. She met me 2 weeks later after I received a call that she was kicked out of the house by her father. They had gotten into a big, huge fight, and he threw spray cans at her. He was a monster, but she endured the pain until she simply couldn't anymore. I ran to her side and stayed with her in a motel since she had nowhere else to go. That night we made love. She cried. She cried into my heart. My body was like a sanctuary for her weariness, and I fell madly in love with her. Eventually, we kept seeing each other unbeknownst to my family, especially my mother. I was horrible at lying, but quickly learned how. One night, we went out, and it was just simply too late to go home. I also learned how to drink, and I couldn't drive home. One night turned into one weekend. My mother was frantic. I had never been out for an entire weekend, but then again, I was 23, and the enmeshment I had with my mom simply needed to end. It never really did. But I was determined to make my life my own. The first time V hit me was a year later. I never knew exactly why, but then again, no one really knows when domestic violence happens. It just does. After a year of silence from my mother and betrayal from V, I simply stopped holding back my words and I told her that I was unhappy. She slapped my cheek while we were in bed. I was stunned and horrified and scared. No one in my life had ever hit my face before. I was angry and felt betrayed by her. That was the beginning of how I kept breaking my own heart. But as a woman of abuse, too, I made excuses for her, for me, and simply kept going on. Every hit she gave me only deepened my dependence on her and moved me away from me. I was fired in countless jobs. I gained 200 pounds, and all I did was stay home and smoke cigarettes. And most of what I did was cry and obsess. She would come home nearly every night and rape me. She forced me to have sex with her because it was my duty to her as her partner. So I'd like for you to think about that story, what feelings and emotions that emoted in you, and to couple that not only as clinicians, as people, as human beings, people part of the community, people who are allies to the community, and to see what are the differences in that story as opposed to a story where it would be a boy and a girl, a man and a woman. So let's begin, shall we? Emotional abuse and the definition. I'm not going to read all the PowerPoints because I think that's kind of boring, but I will try and just pick out some of these key words. So we know that emotional abuse, if we studied it and we really understand the definition of emotional abuse, it's verbal aggression, it's intimidation, right? Manipulation, humiliation. It's a pattern of behavior that diminishes the identity of somebody. It steals your own sense of being and your own sense of propriety. There's a lot of victim blaming, undermining, and victim self-esteem. I'm not sure what that is, but I don't know if it's me. Let me see if I can try and turn this off. Let me see. Huh? Is that me? Okay, there we go. Okay. So we talk about emotional abuse, and sometimes we don't really even know exactly what emotional abuse looks like. It could be, hey, gosh, that dress, really? Are you really gonna look that butch? Are you going to be that femmy? Hey, can you not be so transy today? Those are microaggressions, and that's emotional abuse because it takes away the validation of who we are, devalues our own sense of being. And unfortunately, it also creates physical manifestations in our body. That every time we get a word, a phrase, an inference, a look, we have a physical reaction in our bodies. And as we know, therapists, we're looking at all of the aspects that affect us, right? Statistics. This one is really shocking to me. 43%, and it actually goes up to 90% of lesbian couples have experienced some level of emotional abuse in every relationship they've been in. For men, for bisexual women, is 61. For men, actually, in male-to-male relationships, it went up to 54, and we'll look at some more statistics. And then coupled with people of color, so it creates this, right, onion effect that we're going to have to start deconstructing. Emotional abuse, to me, is the most insidious form of abuse because it stays and it lingers. It's like the vapor that seeps in and it never goes away. And it supports a viewpoint and a stigma that we have unfortunately been imposed into. Our own personal stigma as well as society stigma. And it perpetuates that stigma without us even knowing it sometimes. When we talk about deconstructing abuse, right? We're talking about, again, 43% of lesbian women, 61% of bisexual women have experienced rape, physical violence, stalking, intimate partner violence as well, as opposed to 35% of heterosexual women, which is really, really interesting. 26% of gay men and 37% bisexual men have experienced the same. When we talk about males in same-sex relationship, only 26% will actually call the police and report it. Of course, because of the stigma, because of the lack of police engagement and understanding and education. And 5%, that's the statistic that really makes me sad. 5% will actually look for, orders of protection. There are 5 states still in the union, and we'll talk about those states as well, that still don't legally recognize same-sex or LGBTQIA partnerships that can actually look for orders of protection. There are no orders of protections available for those partnerships and that domestic violence. It's only recognized for heteronormative or heterosexual couples. So let's see if we can try and change that. It's even less for transgender victims as well. And of course, Black, African American, and Latino, Latinx communities, Asian American communities, those are even more less likely to report or to have help from the community. So we know all this, right? Types of domestic violence. We have physical abuse, emotional abuse. We also have threats for outing. We also have HIV, a sense of understanding that if someone is HIV positive, that they will out them. There's threats that I will give you HIV, or don't do this because you're going to get HIV, so that the HIV component becomes a central force for control and for power within an emotionally abusive relationship, unfortunately. So I'm going to try and categorize different communities. I know that, we have very little time, and I'd like to also open it up, for discussion, have more time for discussion, for ideas and maybe anecdotes or stories, because I think there's just a wealth of information here, and, this is our think tank. So, but let me just start talking about the one that I personally know, because I am, of course, lesbian as well, and lesbian relationships and the false beliefs in lesbian relationships. Unfortunately, if you're not a lesbian or understanding of the lesbian dynamic, it has been shown in general that women and women violence or emotional abuse is not respected by the community because we're viewed as not violent because you're a woman, right? Because you're a woman, you're supposed to be nurturing and caring, and you're supposed to have this, you have this perception of that you're always going to be taking care of somebody else. So how could you possibly be a perpetrator? How could you possibly be abusive to somebody else? Or how could you actually be abused by somebody of your own gender? And of course, across the board, it's always spoken that, well, gosh, you're a girl. How are you going to let another girl bother you? And that's always a conversation by people who are not understanding of the dynamic in lesbian relationships. And we can take that across the board as well. If it's a male-to-male relationship, well, he's a guy, you're a guy. Can't you put up with it? It's also a question of labeling and also masculinity or femininity. And that gets challenged all the time. And that is really, really difficult to see when you're seeing a client who has all these layers, and on top of that, the stigma within the context of the relationship is not being understood whatsoever because there's this label that's being put on. Lesbians don't, generally speaking, seek out help because we're so happy to be in a relationship with another girl, finally, maybe. And because we're so happy to be in this relationship with this other girl, and everybody else is telling us, oh gosh, really? You're gay? Dang. There you go. Welcome to the family. Amen. That's good. We always succumb to the crumbs of a situation that can be potentially and is very dangerous because we don't have that acceptance from everyone else. So what happens is that, well, at least she's a woman. At least she loves me sometimes. At least we have good times when we go to gay pride. At least she calls me her wife. At least. What I found in this scenario, and of course across the board in other scenarios too, people who are in transgender community, people who are in bisexual community, intersex community, even asexual community, who's never talked about really, right? Is that we're looking for connection as human beings. That's what we want. Our minds are built for that. We know that we want to find that connection. And when we find that small piece of connection, it's kind of like water in a desert. And all of a sudden, our tolerance and our threshold for pain increases. And that increase in tolerance and threshold for pain creates more gap, more room, more space for more pain. And then the cycle of justification begins, both as victim and perpetrator. I'd also like to say that there's victims on both sides of the gun. We know that. That the person who's perpetrating the abuse is also a victim. And that has chosen that style or that genre or that way of being to exert security in their life. We know that as well. But within context of lesbian relationships, gay relationships, trans relationships, intersex, we're looking for that contact that is so minimal from the rest of society that we'll just put up with whatever we can just to have that glass of water, just to have that little taste of love, just to have that affirmation that we're okay. And that's where the abuse gets more and more insidious. Let me go back a little bit. So in looking at some of these, and I can also share this with you guys. Let me see if I can go back. I don't know how to go back. Some of these like differences. So with women, it's been researched, and unfortunately the research is very little. When I actually started doing this PowerPoint, I was looking. So we still need to have a conversation about the lack of research that is being had with emotional abuse and domestic violence in the LGBTQ community, as well as resources. There are some really great agencies. We're all doing the most we can. That's why we're here, right? As well as, resources for education to help the police department or, the laws change. But it's just the conversations are just not, the research isn't there. So, I invite you all to engage in some, good, solid research so that we can continue to have anchors and move forward with evidence. With men-to-men relationships, what we see a lot in this research that's already come out is that men tend to isolate other men. Now, women do the same, but because women have an expectation of being social, that is not as directed in terms of a perpetrator abusing a victim. When it comes to men, there is isolation. Isolation is used as power. As well as sex, right? So I'll either withhold sex, or I'll isolate you from your other, gay male friends or your family, because it's an expected norm that male-to-male relationships tend to be very, very specialized in their social networks, right? So the perpetrator will isolate the victim. Fat and body shaming. With men, it becomes a more physical realm for them, as well as understanding that, hey, if you're not looking good, if you're not looking perfect, if you're a little bit overweight, or if your penis is not too big, or it's not girthy enough, or maybe your ass is flat, right? All of these things creates a sense of shame for the victim, and it creates a foothold of power and control for the perpetrator. HIV status, which I talked about earlier, and verbal shaming, as well as economic and age differences. Now, with male-to-male relationships, that seems to be a point of prestige. That if I'm with an older male or a younger male, depending on what the expectation of that person is, in how they're viewed in society, they can use that as a power and control, abusive mode, so that they can move forward in that direction with the outwardly, I would say fame, right? What happens is that that's also used across the board. And that's really, really sad, because when you see two people that are falling in love and they start utilizing, hey, I make more money than you do, I have a better career, I have a doctorate degree and you only have a high school diploma, you're my boy toy, you're my sugar daddy, that creates a disjunct and unlevel playing ground, right? So the power and control and the abuse begins. Outing the victims. We've seen that a lot, especially with people who are in the public, view or public sector, or people who are in families that are not accepting of their, their identity or their sexuality, not validating their masculinity as well as not validating their feminine side. And that can also create a sense of, hey, you're not feminine enough for me, or you're not masculine enough for me. Again, power and control. In the transgender relationships, what I found was that there was a lot of substance abuse that was integrated with transgender relationships, where there was a lot of emotional abuse as well. So 76% have identified as having psychological or emotional problems. 15%, I think that actually that statistic might be even higher, have actually attempted suicide. And of course, 98% identified at least one negative impact in their experiences in domestic abuse. So 98% to me speaks to almost every person who's in the transgender relationship or is transgender themselves and has a relationship is now currently experiencing abuse. And that is scary, because we still haven't gotten to the conversation of what it means to be transgender in the society. We haven't even identified the basic fundamental understanding of transgender relationships and dynamics, let alone trying to reach them in intervention, trying to reach them in treatment, try to reach them to the point where they can feel secure in our office to go into the healing. People of color raises the bar. So if you come from a marginalized community, such as ours, and then you add to the fact another marginalization, which is color, and maybe you even have mixed color situation, economic status, and a cultural identity that nobody understands, and then on top of that, your partner, who is your solid base, is abusing you. There is nowhere to go. And nobody to listen to your story. And that is something that I think that here in Los Angeles, particularly, and a lot of these, unfortunately, a lot of this research was done either from Australia, from Canada, from Scotland, from England, very little here still in the United States. But the biggest problem exists right here. So my concern as a clinician, as a therapist, is how am I going to reach those communities, especially communities of color? Now, I see a lot of wonderful colors here, so I'm really happy to see like people from different like backgrounds and so forth. And I'm sure everybody has the story of, yeah, you know, mom, yeah, she goes to church, she prays for me, she prays for my soul. Well, when you're talking about a Puerto Rican culture, which is where I came from, my father was from London and my mother Puerto Rico, but I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. When you talk about a Puerto Rican culture and you tell a Puerto Rican mom that you're gay, get thee to the nunnery, right? Because the expectation was, and is still very much so, how dare you? How dare you humiliate me, right? In general terms. Now, there's still a lot of wonderful Puerto Rican families that support their lesbian daughters, or gay sons, or transgender sons and daughters, or intersex sons and daughters. There's a lot of wonderful people who are starting to change the narrative. But the consensus in the Latin community, at least in general sense, is that's disgusting. You need to go away and put on a dress. Next time I see you, I hope his name is Jorge, right? Not to use your name, but in Black communities, right? In Black communities, it's shifted and changed a little bit only because there are already a sense of marginalization, so there's a sense of cohesion there, but still very much, no. So I don't want to preach to the choir here, but I just wanted to softly, gently remind you that all of these different layers come into play. That's the minute that person sits down in our office, the minute that person sits in front of us, and that we need to start reminding ourselves that, hey, what are the factors holistically that I need to look at in order for there to be a more cohesive sense of healing and direction. All right, so here we go. These are the modalities that most people are using, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, as well as brain spotting, mindfulness, reality therapy, when we just kind of solution focus them right into, hey, we got to get this done, forget about the past, just get it done. Understanding the culture, that's so vital. I think that is the key component here in understanding emotional abuse. Empathetic and compassionate treatment. And what are the differences? So does anybody know the difference between being empathetic and compassionate? Or can tell me what the difference is? Anybody want to say? You got a great smile. Why don't you tell me?
Oh gosh, well, empathetic I would think would be meeting them like through experience, and compassionate would be more like a sympathetic kind of like I understand where empathy is. I feel. Is that I don't know.
Like I
I'm
witness
not a
versus I'm
clinician.
with you.
Yeah.
I need a clinician to help me explain what I'm saying.
So from my understanding is when you're being empathetic, you are stepping yourself into that person's shoes. So you're actually feeling what they're feeling. And you are, you said it beautifully, and thank you so much for sharing. But I'm stepping into that person's shoes. So I'm becoming that person. But that doesn't leave me any room to actually be myself over here. Compassionate is, of course, giving that distance so that you can actually help. It's like the viewpoint of somebody is drowning, and instead of reaching out or jumping in there, kind of pushing them out and drowning with them, it's just putting the stick down and making sure that you don't let go of that stick so that they can pull up. So to me, that is one of the most key components. Especially we're going to have cross-transference issues, and we're going to have issues of, connection. And oh my gosh, I remember when that happened to me when I was 15 and all that stuff. That having that separation of, I'm going to be compassionate at this point. I'm going to just keep that right there, but still be there, right? To thine own self be true. I'll leave that clinical instinct part to the last. To thine own self be true. There's going to be some stories I don't want to hear at all. Emotional abuse is so insidious that it seeps right into the therapeutic session. And to me, and what I've experienced is that in understanding that that emotional abuse is seeping right into the therapeutic session, it's also going to fall right on me because guess what? Their emotional communication is what they know and what they're going to probably have with me. So I need to be aware of my own sense of self and my own identity. So that when that starts pouring in, guess what? Boundary. And that's it. Creating a sense of safety. I think a lot of times, and I'm so happy that this isn't the group that actually needs to hear this, because there's too many people in our industry, too many therapists, counselors, mental health workers, who just don't create safety for their clients. What does safety look like? It could look like eye contact. It could look like no contact. It could look like I'm just sitting here next to you. It could look like I'm going to change the narrative for you just for a little bit so you can step out of your trauma. There's so many different ways that we can create that. And when we're talking about LGBTQ communities, hey, how's your girlfriend? Or, hey, what's going on? Or she, to a person who just transitioned from male to female. Those are moments when we create safety. We create a space for them. And for me, I feel connected and can be compassionate because I'm being there with them, but I'm not them. I can't speak as a transgendered female. I'm a cisgendered female who is also gay. So I would like to be cared for in that sense, and consistently, every single time. That means that me as a clinician, I would have to create another level of responsibility, another level of awareness and self-care. Empowerment. I'm going to connect this with clinical instinct. For me, empowerment means clinical instinct. Clinical instinct leads me to help someone feel empowered. If I can understand exactly what it is that's going on in a relationship that's gone awry, and I'm just going to give you an example. Let's just say my client is 37 years old. He's been in a relationship for approximately 3 years with his boyfriend, partner, who is 52. And his partner, for the last 3 years, doesn't like the fact that my client is talking to his friends and wants to go out dancing, wants to go to the Abbey every night, right? Because he's tired and he works and he's an attorney and he lives in Brentwood and he wants to come home to eat. What happens? I, as a lesbian therapist, need to attune myself to what is going on with him to the point where I really, really can hear him and can really be in that space with him and not put any of my bias and my discrimination in front and say, well, you're a guy. Come on. And it's really, really important for me to stay attuned every single step of the way. So in order for me to do that, my clinical instinct has to be sharpened. Deconstructing to build again. Holistic perspective is what I studied. Rehabilitation counseling is what I studied. I went to Cal State LA. I'm a non-traditional student. I'm 53. I'm giving you all the stats, right? So I was really, really excited about looking at the whole perspective of a person. Not just, hey, the emotional abuse, hey, the way that they're treating you. It's also about what kind of work are you doing? Are you eating every day? And by the way, did you sleep well last night? And is your medication kind of messing with you? And also, you look really good today. All of those things that play into the perspective of how they feel from day to day to day. And it's really at the drop of a hat. When I think about emotional abuse, it's so natural that they're falling into these abusive patterns every single day. How can I make it not natural for them? How can I debunk it? There's a phrase in science that says, science abhors a vacuum. You take something out, science is going to fill it up with something. So we might as well fill it up with something good. And we might as well have something good to fill it up with. And that's the struggle, and that's the art of therapy, as the way I see it. So we talked about what unhealthy looks like. What does healthy look like? Respecting your partner, gender pronouns as well. Supporting your partner's gender identity and expression, of course, right? Supporting your partner's sexual orientation. Understanding and feeling comfortable about talking about sex, physical and emotional. There's a lot of relationships that we all experience, lesbian, gay, transgender. People don't want to talk about sex. It becomes icky. So there's a sexual repression that starts becoming part of the norm of language of that relationship, where it's just acted upon, but it's not really talked about. Because talking about it becomes this taboo. So it's important to talk about sex. Like, hey, did you like it when she sucked your breast? Did you like it when he was, behind you and, going inside you from behind? It's important to be able to talk about those things and normalize that in the session. For me, I believe it's really, really vital, because in that sense, it creates a sense of safety around sex, which tends to be one of the most used power and control tools from the perpetrator or felt from the victim. So it's really important that we're able to talk about sex, right? Building them up instead of tearing them down, and what that looks like. One person may say, I don't need for you to bring me flowers. I really don't. But I need for you to help me at home. Love languages, right? Another person says, I really would like for you to say, I love you every single morning. And the other person doesn't really want to say that. Where's the compromise? And if there isn't, why? And is that abusive? That's a question that you could think about. Love shouldn't hurt so much. That was something that someone told me a while back. It shouldn't be this complicated. Well, what does that mean? We're all complicated. Drama is, right? Like those horrible jokes, the two lesbians do on the second date, right? Yeah, they say, rented a U-Haul, right? But I don't say that. I just say, got another drink. But in essence, right? It shouldn't hurt so much. It shouldn't be so difficult. Why? Because happiness isn't difficult. Joy isn't difficult. And we forgot what it meant to be happy, what it felt like to feel joy in the relationship and with the expectation of that in the relationship. We transferred fantasy a fantastical illusion of what could be, to what actual joy is. Unfortunately, that in and of itself has mitigated our own abuse and helped the perpetrator be even more abusive. Okay. So ending the shame, laws, education, teaching someone to have insight, which is really hard, deconstructing their own narrative of who they are, and that's just leaf after leaf after leaf, empowering them every step of the way, creating a space for them to grow, creating a space for ourselves to grow as professionals, right? Being caring towards ourselves. And it takes conscious effort to be okay. It takes that conscious effort to be happy. It takes that conscious effort to be flowing. So, I have I was thinking about, kind of like a way of thinking of how we can do this and how we can kind of compromise and meet ourselves in the middle and meet our clients in the middle. So there's this analogy that is used in parenting. The analogy is an analogy of water. Permissive parenting is what? Open ocean, right? Everything goes. So you're this like little boat and you're kind of floundering around and just kind of floating around. And there's no direction, there's no north, there's no landing point. And at some point, a storm's going to come and either take you over, or you're going to keel, or you're going to survive, and you're going to get to wherever you need to go. But it's very permissive. Love is like that too. Relationships and boundaries are like that too. We have a water hose. Water hose is one way and one way only. Rigid, no movement, no growth, no creativity. You can't be yourself. Don't look over there. Stop breathing. Why are you wearing that? No sex tonight. You didn't behave yourself. On and on and on, right? And then, of course, we have the river. And that's where I always like to be. Ebbs, flows, opens, closes, but always has a boundary. It always has a riverbank. And that riverbank is never overflowing the water. Is that interesting? Nature is actually teaching us how to be in healthy relationships. Because if we don't overflow, guess what? There's moments when we can feel more creative, more fluid, and there's moments when we kind of gotta save our money. We kind of gotta, hey, my partner doesn't really like that. Let me not do it over and over and over again. So I see that in this analogy, we're able to move forward in this river mentality. So I invite everyone to be a river. I'd like to end by saying that being a human is not easy. It sure is a whole hell of a lot of fun. When we see emotional abuse in our clients, it's about the deconstruction of what is not human and the construction of what is human. I think that's the most important thing to understand. If we continue to realize who we are as human beings in this community, in this diversity, then we can also see the humanness in our clients and allow them to see it within themselves. I want to thank you for your time.
So thank you so much. Just a little note, if you guys want to ask her a question, I know it's a little, but it's a mic. If you could raise your hand, and I'll come right over to you. Any questions for her at all?
Hi, my name's David. I wanted to ask, I noticed in in your presentation, a lot of the statistics said identified. And my question is more like if they're still in a state of being an abuser or being abused, maybe they don't identify it as abuse. Do you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so like that unconsciousness and maybe it's normative in their culture, maybe it's normative in their lifestyle, maybe it's normative in whatever their environment is,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't identify it that way. I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of like maybe those numbers are much higher if they would actually were in treatment or had become more conscious to identify it as abuse.
Right. I think, and thank you for saying that, because yeah, we always assume that our clients see that as abuse, right? Because we do, and we're looking at it like, hey, this isn't fun. But I think that the reason that they're there is for probably they came in with something else. Maybe they're coming in with substance use disorders and depression, anxiety, and as you start peeling the onion, you start realizing, they're in an abusive relationship. So I believe that it is our job and my job to identify that for them. And I need to be really clear in my own definition of what is emotional abuse. And then inevitably understand why are they there in the first place. They're there for so many different reasons, right? So in that deconstruction, we start allowing them to see that, I'm in an abusive cycle, and this is scary. And I want to make sure that they come back the following session, so I don't want to freak them out that much, but give them an empowerment tool. And that's where my clinical instinct comes into play. Because if I don't have that tool to provide for them at that moment, or that sense of empowerment, or that sense that it's going to be okay, don't worry. I just gave you a diagnosis of cancer, but hey, you might go into remission. Let's see if we can do this. If that sense of empowerment, that sense of hope, I don't think that it's going to, I think it's going to be a much harder road, a much more difficult journey. Yeah. Identifying emotional abuse, I think that really falls on our shoulders. And if not, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah, just the reason I'm saying it is because in my experience, I mostly work with men as opposed to other sexes or identities, but on both sides of it, either stuff they're doing, they don't identify as abuse, especially emotional abuse, and or they're coming in and trying to heal from something and they don't identify what happened to them as abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the walls start to come down and the healing starts when they can do that. And I agree, it takes some help.
Can I ask you how do the walls come down for you?
When they'll describe like a situation that happens that to me is clearly abusive, and be like, well, how do you characterize, like, how do you see that? How do you experience that? Like, what feelings do you have around that? And then come back around to, trying to get them to see it from a different perspective that isn't normative, that isn't healthy, that isn't something that helps them build an identity and a belief system that, that is healing and not destructive. And a lot of it's intergenerational trauma. A lot of it's, family of origin stuff, that happened where they didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
And then when they start to do it, they soften and they're willing to do deeper work to like continue to heal. And like you said, sometimes it's like a sideways thing where like they're talking about one thing, but it leads into another, and then that opens another door. Like that happens a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I agree. I mean, I think that what happens is that we, in this constant, like, reaffirming to our clients, hey, you're in an abusive cycle. You're in an abusive cycle, by the way. You're in an abusive cycle. It's kind of like repeating it. We have to be creative because they're normalizing. This is normalized for them since the very beginning. As we know, the attachments and understanding and what happened is, we were expected to be, in a female situation or male situation with these norms already in place. We saw abuse with our parents. We saw abuse with our communities. So in order for them to really understand, oh my gosh, this is, oh my God, what? What? No, not me. But she loves me.
Yeah.
She loves me. And so that deconstruction, I believe, needs to happen in conjunction with construction. It has to happen simultaneously. Otherwise, I believe we'll lose them.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Well,
Uh,
keep talking. Roxana, go across front of the.
I'm just
I'm running.
curious in the situations where there's like intergenerational trauma when it comes to emotional abuse, like does it tend to come from models you see in your parents? Are these sort of new traumas that occur because maybe you grew up LGBT? I'm just curious if you have any insight.
So that's the hot button for the day. So okay, so this is where we go into psychoeducation, right? There's biological factors, there's societal factors, there's cultural factors, there's interfamily interrelational factors, interdevelopmental factors. So what happens is that when you start looking at the whole onion, you know that this is like an onion with some nasty stuff inside, right? So what are you going to provide for the client where they're going to feel safe and scratch at the onion at the same time? So where does this come from? I really believe it comes from biological propensity for sensitivity. I believe it comes from attachment disorders, insecure, secure, avoidant. I believe it comes from learned behavior from parents or caretakers or even foster care situations. I believe it comes from, generational trauma that has been adopted and is imprinted in their DNA. I also believe it comes from nutrition. I also believe it comes from not getting laid or getting laid too much. Do you understand what I mean? All of these things, to me, it's these factors that come into play. So my sense of how am I accepting emotional abuse from somebody else is a very, very big conversation that for me, I understand I need to have gingerly, carefully, and methodically in order for me to truly get to the heart of the matter. There are going to be moments, and I have made plenty of mistakes where and I say mistakes because I just kind of lost it. I didn't catch the ball. Where it's like, oh, I didn't catch that. This person was cutting their arms, and it wasn't because they got raped when they were 9. It was because their dad just left them. And all of these different reasons. And to me, I feel that it's really important that, again, going back to the clinical instinct, that is what is the saving grace as a clinician, understanding at that moment what is my instinct clinically with that person so that I can get that information. Does that make sense?
It does.
Thank you.
Everybody's afraid of this little mic. It's just little.
And by the way, excuse me, I don't mean to use foul language.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I like to make fun.
Okay. We're all adults here.
I'm wondering, do you ever talk about polyvagal theory with the client?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to transition to helping them see where they're most stuck, and then you can kind of delve into why.
Absolutely. Have you studied that profusely?
Yeah, I do neurofeedback, so I'm all about nervous system and brains and trauma.
Oh my gosh. So maybe you can answer that question a little bit better biologically, right?
Yeah, this is a collaboration place.
Right?
It's like a very big question.
Pretty big, but it's important.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so polyvagal, I'm sure you understand. But yes, what is triggering me and what's my parasympathetic, going for right now? And does that, if somebody that's wearing a Lancome, Tresor from 1985 going to trigger me from my mom? Yeah. And my partner just happens to like older perfumes or whatever. Jeez, I don't find that sexy at all. So there's like all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I totally understand. Yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to emotional abuse, it's what is the communication that we're listening to? What is the voice in our head? And is that voice telling us, hey, I love you if you do this? Well, guess what I'm going to do? Oh, I'm certainly going to do it because I'm going to get love at the end of it. I see it as intermittent reinforcement. When you go and play Vegas, you see people dedicated fully to that one slot machine from The Wizard of Oz. And then they don't go to Elvis. Oh no, Elvis is no good. And they don't go to Marilyn Monroe. And they don't go to because they've been winning at that machine intermittently and probably have lost their entire life savings. They don't care because that machine's going to pay out. So I believe that emotional abuse works like that. Any kind of abuse works like that. There's going to be a payout. There's going to be a reason why you're there. What's the payout? That's my job as a therapist, to figure out what that payout is and debunk it.
All right. This is more of like a subject of conversation in regards to this piece. So when working with somebody who is experienced domestic violence, I often find in our society there's often this easy like, oh, just leave, right? But it's so much more complex than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a believer in the lens that the person that is in the situation is the expert of their situation. They know the nuances. If they're in front of you in an office and in a clinical setting, they are alive at this moment. So they're doing something right, and that's keeping them safe and alive. And I wanted to see just kind of talk about the nuances of working with somebody who is within a relationship that has DV, while advocating for their safety, and also you may look at someone and be like, I really want them out of this situation, right? But they're also the expert of their lives. So kind of like that type of therapeutic dance to validate where they're at, who they are, their own agency in their life, and then also supporting them with that process.
And I love that you're bringing this up. And, when you talk about also human trafficking, you talk about narcissistic relationships or people that are narcissistic, personality disorders or mood disorders, you're also talking about that very delicate dance, right? Mm-hmm. So I truly believe that there's got to be and everyone has their voice, right? Everyone has their sense of, movement with modalities. I believe that there's a really good possibility of utilizing reality therapy, kind of being a badass, and at the same time having this undeniable empathy or compassion, where they know that even though you're being a little bit tough with them, and at the same time you're creating that sense of safety, that they will always trust you. So it really comes down to just one word: trust. Do they trust you? And if you don't trust yourself, they certainly will never trust you. Mm-hmm. They will see right through the BS faster than anything. And you guys have seen it. You guys worked with it all the time. You guys are there. To me, in a person who is in an abusive cycle, they're going to be resistant. They're going to relapse. And it becomes very addictive because we talked about intermittent reinforcement, and it triggers the polyvagal system, and it makes me feel good, and it makes me feel sad, it makes me feel good, and at least I'm alive, yay, But at the same time, that you're losing time, you're losing your sense of self, you're losing your purpose, you're losing your calling. So those things, those values, are being lost because they're not being reinforced. So I would say that the person needs to trust you. I would also say go back to what are your basic values in life? What's your core identity? Who are you as a person? Yes, you're gay, and yes, every year you go to, Long Beach, and and yes, you love to, be in community, and less, you have all the labels, and you're vanilla, and you're butch, and you're femme, and you're a princess. But who are you? That's where I believe labels can hinder us. Mm-hmm. We get stuck to our labels. And it's not necessarily the totality of who we are. And I believe that it's in understanding that trust factor between the client and the therapist, as well as then now tell me who you are. You trust me? Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Now, who are you? Mm-hmm. And this is who you are? Then let's fight for that person. Let's empower that person. And I'm going to keep reminding you, even if you forget. That's what I feel. Does that make sense? Yeah. Three snaps and a swirl. Thank you.
So incredible. Any other questions? I appreciate you. This
Oh,
oh
thank
God,
you.
this is such. A
Happy
couple of us-
Valentine's Day,
A
by the
couple
way.
of us look back going, whoa, this is getting personal over here.
Yeah, yeah.
I appreciate it. This is such a valuable topic,
Yeah.
and yeah. So Zasha, you got more stuff to
Thank our speaker and
Oh, thanks, you guys. I appreciate you guys very much.
I want to demic her.